Remember the Epstein files? The Epstein files, those are the things that Donald Trump spent 2024 promising to release, and those are the files that were supposedly released back in February when Pam Bondi invited a bunch of right-wing influencers to the White House and handing them big, flamboyant notebooks that said on them Epstein files, and they were all smiling, thinking that they had an exclusive on all this good stuff that was for the first time going to be publicly revealed. And as it turned out, the whole thing was a sham. All these documents had been long ago made public in a whole variety of ways through various litigations and FOIA requests on the part of media outlets. There was absolutely nothing new in any of them. And here is Pam Bondi talking about that on Fox News on February 21st, 2025, which is basically 2 full months ago now.
DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients? Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that. I'm reviewing JFK files, MLK files. That's all in the process of being reviewed because that was done at the directive of the president from all of these agencies.
So have you seen anything that you said, oh my gosh?
Not yet.
Okay.
Now, the whole issue of the client list and the like, I understand why that gets people interested and excited. But the reality is that we've already seen so much evidence of the people with whom Jeffrey Epstein was cavorting. People just of the highest status and wealth throughout the world. It basically brought down Prince Andrew of the British royal family. We know Bill Clinton and Donald Trump both had extensive relationships, social relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which doesn't mean that they were on his island or having sex with underage girls. But we know all the people who have been associated with Jeffrey Epstein for a long time. There may be some client list, although Pam Bondi says I haven't seen anything shocking so far. But to me, that's not really the most interesting question, just because of how much disclosure there's already been around who's been on those flights, who's been to the island. We pretty much know the answers to all of those questions. To me, the much more interesting question is the geopolitical one. Obviously, when you have the most powerful people on the planet being put into compromising positions on Jeffrey Epstein's island, on his plane, in his mansion in Palm Beach, in his mansion in the middle of Manhattan, and we know that there's all kinds of tapes and recordings that have been made that gives enormous amounts of blackmail power over these people. The question is of whether foreign governments, whether intelligence agencies in our country or others, in some way exploited that information, helped arrange it. There's always been a question of what was the real source of Jeffrey Epstein's massive wealth. We're talking here about a kind of wealth that is a multi-billionaire wealth. He wasn't just somebody who was extremely wealthy. There's zillions of people like those. There's all sorts of ways to become wealthy on that level. We're talking about somebody who had just the kind of wealth that only billionaires have. Constant flying jets, massive jets that were private, that he took everywhere. $80 to $100 million properties all over the world. The ability to purchase a private island, to donate massive sums of money to gain entrance into all sorts of... where did that money come from? Nobody really has ever been able to answer that. We know a couple of things, including his relationship with somebody named Les Wexner, who himself is a multi-billionaire, with whom Jeffrey Epstein worked. But there's no real expertise, identifiable expertise that Jeffrey Epstein had. He never did anything on Wall Street that was particularly impressive. And the question has always been, was there some government, some intelligence agency behind him with whom he was working or for whom he was working to create essentially a honey trap that would give these intelligence agencies knowledge of and therefore power over what a lot of people were doing? That, to me, is the answer that we don't have any resolution on. Now, maybe the answer to that is no. But we really haven't had any sort of documentation providing guidance on that one way or the other, and we know for certain that these files are in the custody of the U.S. government, which has repeatedly promised to release them, pretended to release them back in February, although they didn't. And the question is, where are the answers to that questions? When will we get the answers to that questions, if ever? And what we're being told right now is that the reason we can't have them is because there's a lot of redactions that need to take place for national security purposes. I understand that some of these files would need to be redacted before released. You don't want to release the names, for example, of victims who haven't been identified, who don't want to be identified, of some of the girls who were sex trafficked. That'll make sense. And perhaps you don't even want to release the names of the people who were Jeffrey Epstein associates, but where you have no evidence they engaged in any wrongdoing because that can harm their reputation. I understand that as well. But why would there be national security redactions unless Jeffrey Epstein had relationships with foreign governments? And if Jeffrey Epstein had a relationship with foreign governments, it seems like we could probably narrow down which are the most likely. And then that leads me to the question of whether or not it's really possible that if those answers exist within the files of the US government under the Trump administration, whether we will ever actually see those at all. And at the very least, we ought to keep up the pressure. Here was the Department of Justice, the Public Affairs Division, on February 27th of this year, with the title, Attorney General Pam Bondi releases first phase of declassified Epstein files. And that was when it turned out that they made a big fanfare out of, oh, look, we're fulfilling our promise, you're getting the Epstein files. They invited these Twitter influencers to the White House. Here's Rogan O'Hanley. And they posted pictures of themselves. There they are. I think that's Chaya Ryak, too, the proprietor of Libs of TikTok, walking out with their binders. The binders had Epstein files. They showed them to the public. Though you see, it's like the Epstein files. Look, we got the Epstein files. We're so happy. We're so smiley. We're celebrating. We're finally going to get the answers. Look, they're giving it to independent media. We're right outside the White House. And there you see the close-up, the Epstein files, phase 1. And it turned out these documents were an absolute joke. Not a single page that was in them that was previously unseen. Now, Trump has been asked about this on a couple of occasions, including on April 22nd, which was yesterday. He was in the Oval Office, and he was asked, hey, what about those Epstein files? And here's what he said.
Epstein documents released, the rest of them.
Which documents?
The Epstein files.
I don't know. I'll speak to the Attorney General about that. I really don't know. I know that we've done the RFK.
Yeah.
The Kennedy, Martin Luther King is out there very shortly, so we'll find out. But we've really announced we're doing them in full transparency. You know, when we did JFK, people were saying, oh, maybe it wasn't all, it was all.
He's absolutely right about that. There was a full disclosure of the JFK files. Now, there's still some files within the CIA and other places that haven't quite been released, but the documents they released, they did it in unredacted fashion. And that's why I have those questions about the Epstein files. Why are all these redactions necessary for this, but not for the JFK files? And again, the things that concern me the most are when they start saying that the redactions are for national security purposes. What possible national security implications are there, or aspects are there to the Jeffrey Epstein case, unless we're talking about relationships with domestic intelligence agencies or foreign intelligence agencies? We do have some clues about some of the people, the extremely wealthy people who surrounded Jeffrey Epstein, who seem responsible in some way for his ability to have constructed this very powerful network of highly connected people and what their connections are. Here from the Middle East Monitor, January of 2020, Jeffrey Epstein was blackmailing politicians for Israel's Mossad. A new book claims, quote, the claims are being made by the alleged former Israeli spy Ari Ben Manshein in a soon-to-be released book, Epstein, Dead Man Tells No Tales, in which he said that he was the handler of Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell, who was also an Israeli espionage agent and was the one who introduced his daughter and Epstein to Mossad. The handler, Ben Mashane, himself an Iran-born Israeli businessman who said he worked for Mossad from 1977 to 1987, is a mysterious figure who was arrested in 1989 in the U.S. on charges of arms dealing. He was acquitted in 1990, however, only after a jury accepted that he was acting on behalf of the Israeli state. Israel then denied that Mashane had any links with its intelligence services and attempted to distance itself from him, despite the fact that other news reports both in the U.S. and Israel confirmed he was acting on the country's behalf. The new book, which also speculates that Maxwell may have worked for other governments as a double or triple agent, says that despite reports Epstein and Ghislaine met in the early 1990s in New York, that in fact they met earlier through her father, who introduced Epstein to Mossad before Ghislaine joined in the activities later. Now, let me make clear, I'm not endorsing all of this or any of this. This has been out in the ether for a long time. These are very sketchy figures. But we do know for sure that Robert Maxwell, the publishing tycoon, the British publishing tycoon who died under very mysterious circumstances, who was the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Jeffrey Epstein's right-hand person, who is now serving a long time in prison for helping him traffic young girls, was a huge supporter of Israel, had all kinds of connections to Israel as well. When he died, here from the Washington Post, November of 1991, Israel gives Robert Maxwell a farewell fit for a hero. Publisher Robert Maxwell today was given a funeral befitting a national hero by Israel, the country with which he developed an intimate and sometimes controversial relationship in the last 3 years of his life. Maxwell, whose body was recovered from the Atlantic Ocean off the Canary Islands last Tuesday after he disappeared from his yacht, was buried late this afternoon in Judaism's most prestigious spot, the cemetery on Jerusalem's Mount of Olives facing the Western Wall. His funeral service in Jerusalem's Hall of the People was attended by a host of Israeli politicians led by Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir and President Chaim Herzog, who eulogized the self-made tycoon as a, quote, man cast in heroic mold. Only a week before his death, the volatile owner of the New York Daily News and Britain's Mirror newspaper group became involved in an exchange of lawsuits with author Seymour Hersh, who accused Maxwell of working with Israel's Mossad intelligence agency. Maxwell's death at sea only intensified the speculation in London, where Hersh promised to produce further revelations of the 68-year-old publisher's clandestine Israeli connections. That's Ghislaine Maxwell's father. Now, in the New York Times in 1994, there was this headline, U.S. author gets an apology in libel case. Quote, the out-of-court settlement announced in High Court in London also ended a countersuit brought by the author Seymour Hersh and the publisher Faber and Faber Limited. The Maxwell lawsuit was prompted by Mr. Hersh's 1991 book, The Samson Option, about Israel's nuclear weapons program. In yesterday's proceeding, a lawyer for the Mirror Group, which was controlled by Mr. Maxwell before his death in November 1991, said it acknowledged that Mr. Hersh, quote, is an author of an excellent reputation of the highest integrity who would never write anything which he did not believe to be true, and that he was in this instance fully justified in writing what he did. That was the end of the lawsuit, was heaping this kind of praise on Seymour Hersh as an author of great integrity after he had accused Robert Maxwell of having very close ties to Israeli intelligence. The person who was closest to Jeffrey Epstein was Les Wexner, a big-time Wall Street tycoon and investor, multi-billionaire, unquestionably gave massive amounts of money to Jeffrey Epstein. Nobody really understood why. He claimed once it became a scandal that it was because Jeffrey Epstein had developed these extremely innovative techniques to help Les Wexner save huge amounts of tax money. Even if that were true, the amount of wealth Jeffrey Epstein amassed would be nowhere near any kind of rational relationship to that sort of claim. Les Wexner had a very close relationship to Israel as well. The Vanity Fair in June of 2021, the mogul and the monster inside Jeffrey Epstein's decades-long relationship with his biggest clients. Quote, of the many mysteries that still surround the life and crimes of the notorious financier, the source of his wealth and thus his power may be the greatest. His long-standing business ties with his most prominent client, billionaire retail magnate Leslie Wexner, held the key. Quote, during the 1990s, both Epstein and Wexner's profile grew on the world stage. In 1991, Wexner co-founded a philanthropic organization of Jewish billionaires known as the Mega Group, which uses some of its vast resources to shape Middle East policy. In 2003, Wexner's foundation commissioned GOP messaging guru Frank Luntz to advise American Jewish leaders on how to rally support for Israel. Quote, for a year, a solid year, you should be invoking the name of Saddam Hussein and how Israel was always behind American efforts to rid the world of this ruthless dictator and liberate their people, Luntz's recommendation stated. Epstein kept close in that circle of influence. UN Ambassador Bill Richardson and Middle East envoy George Mitchell allegedly participated in Epstein's sex ring, according to a lawsuit filed by Guif. That was the woman who also claimed to have been pimped out, essentially, to Prince Andrew when she was a minor. That was where that picture of her and Prince Andrew appeared that basically destroyed his reputation. Richardson and Mitchell adamantly denied the allegation. Israel Prime Minister Ehud Barak was an Epstein confidant. Epstein invested $1 million in one of Barak's business ventures. Barak reportedly visited the East 66th Street condo building. Alan Dershowitz told me he once arrived at Epstein's townhouse as Epstein and Barak were wrapping up lunch. On a chalkboard, Barak had drawn a map of how the West Bank should be divided. Barak could not be reached for comment, but in 2019, he denied any wrongdoing related to the condo visits. Here from the Times of Israel, 2019, Netanyahu again goes after Barak for ties to accused billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. Prime Minister highlights payment to political rival from Wexner Foundation linked to U.S. tycoon who allegedly sex trafficked minors. The video was published with the headline, quote, what else has sex offender Epstein given to Barak? According to Netanyahu's video, Epstein manages the Wexner Foundation. Forbes said he serves as a trustee, and a spokesperson for the institution told the financial news outlet that Les Wexner, founder of the organization, severed ties with Epstein over a decade ago. So we have a lot of information here that clearly shows that people closest to Jeffrey Epstein themselves were heavily involved in the state of Israel, in supporting the state of Israel, in having very close operative relationships with Israeli intelligence. There's also reporting, people claim that Jeffrey Epstein had relationships with Gulf state intelligence agencies, including the Emiratis, potentially the Qataris and the Saudis. But there's certainly enough here to wonder, and again, I'm not in any way suggesting that this is dispositive. What's dispositive are the records in the possession of the Trump administration. And what concerns me, aside from how long it's taking, is the fact that we're being told that there has to be redactions made for national security. And for me, if there's some secret client list that we haven't seen before that contains a bunch of names of people who had sex with Jeffrey Epstein's girls, of course, I guess we should see that, especially if it contains the names of powerful people. I don't think that's the sort of thing that has been concealed given all the litigation. But I do think what is substantive and what is very possibly out there in documentation is the extent to which Jeffrey Epstein had ties to intelligence agencies, our own or others, and to what extent these operations were part of those intelligence agencies. And I guess I should say that I have some doubt, given everything we've seen in the Trump administration about the first 3 months and the importance of Israel and the Gulf states in everything that they're doing, that if such documents exist, they would actually ever see the light of day. But given that people have basically stopped talking about the Epstein documents, we thought it was time to remind people that they're still out there, that they have not been released, that there was that fake showing of releasing them at the beginning of the administration that resulted in nothing. And the only way to make sure that these documents get released and get released in a form that is actually meaningful is to keep the pressure up. I know I talk about this sometimes, but it really is true that so many people I know who, as they get older, start thinking that they've learned everything there is to learn. We even have that cliche that captures this sort of thinking, which is you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I always try and convince people, and I've actually tried to learn myself and teach myself and make sure I remember that actually your brain is always growing and is always capable of learning new things. And it's not only possible, but important to continue to do that for the health of your brain, for the satisfaction that you get from continuing to expand your brain. There's so much out there, no matter how much you study, no matter how many places you've been, that you just don't know about that are really worth knowing. Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free online courses. That's right, more than 40 free online courses. You can learn about the works of C.S. Lewis and the stories in the book of Genesis, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, or the history of the ancient Christian church with Hillsdale College's free online courses. Personally, I have been recently enjoying, I said this the last time, the class, The History of Classical Music, Pythagoras through Beethoven, taught by the celebrated pianist and Hillsdale College distinguished fellow Hyperion Knight. This free 5-lesson course explains how much music has developed and what distinguishes the greatest music achievements through the life of Beethoven. Join this course whether you are a music novice or an aficionado of the classical style to learn what makes music great. For example, as you know, I'm very interested in the Enlightenment. I talk about it all the time. And so I had a lot of fun seeing how it interacted, for example, with the late Baroque period. The course is self-paced, so you can start and watch whenever you want. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/Glenn to enroll. There's really no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/Glenn to enroll for free. Hillsdale.edu/Glenn. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.